G'day mate, 40 here. So the HBO TV show White Lotus has finished up its second season, and it's funny how critics are just universally condemning it for not sufficiently punishing those male characters displaying toxic masculinity. And Michelle Goldberg, New York Times columnist, who profiled me twice, once for Salon magazine back in 1998 and then for Talk magazine in 1999. She writes a column this week decrying that maybe one day we'll get TV shows that deal with politics instead of transcending politics. Like, God forbid that TV show doesn't make some sort of didactic left-wing thought. God forbid that we get to transcend politics. So, on a similar kind of silly plane, got New York Times here, when freedom meant the freedom to oppress others. So, I don't really think you can have freedom without the freedom to oppress others, because oppression just means, so many different things that kind of lacks objective meaning. So certainly you should, have laws of the land like they do in Australia. I mean, such a well-run city. Just kind of amazed how well-run Sydney is. Like, there's no trash around, no graffiti, virtually no homeless. Almost no begging on the streets, almost no crime. So you can have a rule of law that perhaps limits people's ability to oppress others, but oppression contains such huge subjective elements that, freedom for one party is going to mean some negative results for another team. So, like, whose side do you ultimately want to be on? So I want to make my way here to the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Here we go, mate. So there's a big New York Times book review article. When freedom meant the freedom to oppress others. Jefferson Cowie's powerful and sobering history of freedom's dominion traces the close association between the rhetoric of liberty in Alabama County and the politics of white supremacy. I don't think liberty was just rhetoric here. All right? So freedom of association is going to mean oppression for some other people. Right? You get to be free to rent to whom you want and sell to whom you want and hire who you want, right? That's going to feel oppressive to the people you don't want to bring into your circle. So freedom is a very big American value. We've got Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Civil War, says Americans are fanatics in freedom. They hate tolls, taxes, turnpikes, banks, hierarchies, governors, and laws. So, of course, different people interpret freedom differently. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, the Quakers, the Scots-Irish, the Cavaliers, like, all had different understandings of freedom, but freedom still remains the dominant American value. But yeah, it comes at a price to others. And you see it in Australia. This is a society dedicated to fairness, which is very different from a society dedicated to freedom. So you have more restrictions on your freedom in Australia, but that comes with greater fairness. So what's more important to you, fairness or freedom? I like community, but community comes at a price. Like, there's a restriction in freedom. I like my freedom, but I'm willing to give up some freedom to have the joy of community. Okay, where am I here? Nope, not going there. G'day mate, 40 here. About to step onto the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And I'm gonna have a good laugh at myself, mate, because I'm always just so enthusiastic about something or another. And the topics of my enthusiasm have frequently changed. And I say, like, 40, what the hell, man? You're always enthused about something. But where's the consistency, mate? Are you a stayer? Are you just flapping around in the breeze? The breeze of the enthusiasm of your constantly changing opinions and perspectives. What the hell? I made a mistake. No pedestrian access. I was wrong. But you know what? Some people really like it, right? Like a couple of introverted Australian blokes get together and it's like, how you going? Oh, good, mate. How about you? Yeah, good. And that's the end of it. But at least with my serial enthusiasms, there are always like 20 different topics that I want to talk about. So I can be a little bit bossy. Right? Oh, let's go here, let's go there. But sometimes that's a blessed antidote to the more passive, introverted bloke. So our strengths and weaknesses, right, depend on the situation. Sometimes our weaknesses become strengths and our strengths become weaknesses, depending on the situation. So I often go into a lot of my social interactions knowing that a lot of people are highly introverted. And it's just trying to bring joy and bring a laugh. And then sometimes I overstep. It's like, oh, that really offended me, mate. So now I misjudge. So generally speaking, people who use humor are pretty good at reading social cues, right? Because you'll get so much blowback if you're misjudging the situation. So I was just reading a Vox article on humor, and so there's like self-denigrating humor, there's affirming humor, there's releasing the tension humor, and generally speaking, you got a sense of humor help make you more of a pleasure to be around. It'll lift other people up, but also notice it totally wearing on people. So if I'm around people on a constant basis, then I need to dial it back a bit. On the other hand, when I'm just with people on an intermittent or occasional basis, then it's more of a time to just let it rip, and people enjoy the change of pace. G'day mate, 40 here. Walking over Sydney Harbour Bridge. So the only reason people don't say what they mean, generally speaking, in politics is because the price is made too high to say what you mean. So you get a lot of euphemisms, right? But the only reason you get euphemisms like states' rights and abortion is because people learn that they can't stand up for what they really believe in. So then people have to go the euphemism route. So Southerners, the 1940s, 50s, 60s, United States, they stood up for what they really believed. But then by about 1964, 65, that became increasingly untenable. And so the segregationist movement realized it could no longer win on a platform of explicit segregation. So it changed to other things, to euphemisms like states' rights and to things like abortion. And abortion became a proxy for racial attitudes towards sexuality, family. And so when George Wallace ran for office, right, he talked about segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Right, that was a key part to his understanding of freedom, also a key part to what many of his voters also believe was freedom. Then by fiat from the US Supreme Court and enforced by the federal government, that option was struck down. Right? No longer had the option of standing for what you really believe in. So when you make what people want illegal, they're going to have to start to lie, or they're going to have to try to seek the protections accorded to religion. So when you listen to Richard Spencer's streams, like he still has many of the same nationalist impulses that drove him 6, 5, 4, 3 years ago, but now he realizes they can't be achieved explicitly, so he's turned to the realm of religion, he's turned to the realm of Apollonianism. And you see with like Nick Fuentes, right, he can't put what he wants first and foremost. He has to clothe it in Christ as King. Right? So in Nick's life and in the rhetoric he uses and in the knowledge he displays, there's very little religious impulse. But the idea that Christ is King is a much more socially acceptable expression of his political views. So George Wallace says, "I've been taught that freedom meant freedom from any threat or fear of government." And he said the black citizens of Alabama, they were free too. They were free to live and to learn and to work and to teach within their separate racial station. Well, that is another form of freedom. So people on the liberal left have this idea that we can just endlessly expand liberty, and that the expansion of civil rights doesn't come at the cost to anyone else, right? The only cost is that people are forced to overcome their ingrained folkways, traditions, bigotry, prejudice, and ignorance. So the left thinks that we can just endlessly expand education and freedom, help people overcome their ignorance, and we'll live in an increasingly better world. So there's this tremendous new book, Freedom's Dominion. So it's by Jefferson Crowe, historian at Vanderbilt University, and it talks about the role of freedom in George Washington Wallace's birthplace of Barber County in Alabama's southeast corner. So, freedom often meant, free to brutalize, right? So when the white settlers moved in, they, fought battles with the Indians. So sometimes diversity means people, get together and live in peace, and it's of mutual benefit to people. Like in Sydney, people seem to be getting along really well. But other times, diversity and proximity mean bloody conflict. And so when the Pilgrims moved into the United States, all right, the Indians didn't like that. And so there were pitched battles. And in the end, one side had to win and one side had to lose. And it was only decided when you had a very clear winner. And I think that's the way it will be in the Middle East as well. Only when there's a very clear winner and one side is dominant will there be peace. So when there's conflict, a clash of vital interests with diversity and proximity, then until one side clearly wins, conflict will continue. The left talks about civil rights as though it's just, endlessly expanding freedom, and that there's no downside to anyone but the reduction of their ignorance. And that's just not how the world works. Right? Loss of freedom of association is a substantial loss of freedom. So George Wallace strode onto the political stage, inveighing against ungodly government and the persecution of whites. So every group has reasons to feel oppressed, even white people, even white Southerners. So George Wallace knew that his freedom brand of politics had considerable popular appeal, that many white Americans felt under strain, were looking for someone to speak for them. And George Wallace stepped up. He became the face of the backlash against the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, against all the court rulings and federal government programs that aim to restore more and more liberty and rights to black American life. But this extension of liberty and civil rights to black American life was experienced as a loss of rights by many white Southerners. And so his common enemies were the elites, the press, and the federal government. That being a Southerner is no longer geographic, he declared in 1964. It's a philosophy and an attitude. And that's still true today. So we still hear echoes of George Wallace in theories about the deep state, in the behavior and rhetoric of Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Right? Ron DeSantis wants to ban certain liberties, such as the liberty of teachers to talk about their sexual orientation to children. So one man's liberty frequently comes at the price of another man's comfort and liberty. So, how did the Republican Party become known for its fixation on the free market, on states' rights, on rolling back federal government overreach? In large part because they couldn't explicitly run on, overturning what became settled law. So in the same New York Times today, there's a good article on why are we celebrating, what the heck guys, why are we celebrating all these Nazis? Right, like Werner von Braun. Yeah, how dare we do that? Oh, Mike Leach, the great football coach, died, and Mike Leach loved to carry on conversations. But when he'd talk on the phone with some stranger for an hour, that often came at the price to other people, right? Such as his assistants who were waiting to have a meeting with Mike Leach, and he'd keep them on hold so he could talk on the phone to a stranger for an hour. So many things in life are not just good and evil. It's good for one group, bad for another group. So here's a New York Times op-ed. Why do Stanford, Harvard, and NASA still honor a Nazi past? Well, they're not honoring the Nazis so much. They're honoring not what the Nazis did, but what these ex-Nazi scientists did for America. So there are no permanent friends and enemies, right? They're just conflicting interests. So from NASA to Stanford to the United States Army, American institutions continue to acknowledge, sometimes even celebrate, high-profile former Nazis. So they shouldn't even acknowledge them. They should just be written out of history and celebrate. So we shouldn't celebrate the good that they've done for America. You can take some disturbing incident from everyone's life and use that to define them. There are no permanent friends or enemies in life. Right? The Nazis were our enemies until the Nazis surrendered. Then they frequently became our allies in the battle against communism. So it was Nazis who helped get the United States to the moon. Right? How did the United States go from fighting the evil of Nazism to lauding ex-Nazis? The United States pursued its interests. Right? When its interests were at odds with Nazism because Hitler had declared war on the United States, they fought Germany, but they weren't fighting the evils of Nazism. They were engaged in a geopolitical struggle. The United States has no interest in allowing other regional hegemons. The United States had no interest in allowing Germany to dominate Europe or Japan to dominate Northeast Asia. So with the defeat of Germany, Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union became America's biggest enemy, and so the Nazis and the Germans, who were our biggest enemy, became our friends. We needed technology to compete with the Soviet Union. We needed West Germany to stand up as a bulwark against communism. So these ex-Nazis offered important expertise, and so they were brought into America, like former SS officer Wernher von Braun. He was meeting with US presidents, received a lot of honors, because he played a very important role for the US. So the US wasn't primarily at war with various ideologies. That was just the rhetoric that the US used. The US uses very internationalist, humanist, liberal, democratic rhetoric to disguise frequently a brutal pursuit of their own self-interest. So this author is confusing American rhetoric with American realities. So the author condemns Wernher von Braun for working for Hitler on his deadly V-2 ballistic missiles. Well, Wernher von Braun was working for his country in a war, and that there was slave labor used to produce their missiles wasn't at the top of his concerns. I think that's understandable. Like, how would you have behaved if you're in his situation? So Washington launched Operation Paperclip, recruiting all these former Nazi scientists to work in America, and they were a tremendous benefit to America. Right? If someone's got necessary skills, needed skills, important skills, yeah, you're strongly incentivized to overlook those things you don't like about them. You don't get to be so pristine. So the Cambridge Dictionary has updated its definition of woman to include trans women. How did we get to this? And I think it began when we started substituting the word gender for sex. So gender is something that is socially constructed. Sex is something that's biological. So once we moved from using gender instead of sex, as in the male sex and the female sex, but now it turned into the male gender, the female gender, then it was inevitable that if male and female is socially constructed, that social construction can change, and so now any man can decide to become a woman. It's just socially constructed. So the traditional view on life accords much greater weight to genetics, to biology. So a major theme of the right, including the dissident right, over the past few weeks is that Sam Bankman-Fried has just been getting away with it because he donated so much money to the Democrats. And it's not a theme that I've amplified, and it's not something that I've considered important that I need to discuss. It's not something that kept me up at night. It's not something that I was angry about. I just ignored it. It didn't seem like a strong case. And now Sam Bankman-Fried has indeed been arrested and charged with fraud. So prosecutors often take a lot more time to build a case than ordinary people think is justified. But you can't just intuit the law. Right? Just because it seems like someone's committed fraud doesn't mean that prosecutors have sufficient evidence and have assembled a strong enough case to arrest someone. So this right-wing paranoia that Sam Bankman-Fried was getting away with it, right, because he was a major donor to the Democrats. He was being treated more leniently by Joe Biden's Justice Department, that he'd been given a free pass to commit massive amounts of fraud. All right, well, the Justice Department's just going after Donald Trump, but it's not going after Democrats. Well, Sam Bankman-Fried's now been arrested and indicted. I think that undercuts that paranoia and that conspiratorial mindset. So yeah, Sam Bankman-Fried donated nearly $40 million to Democrats. But there's no evidence that he was going to get away with it. So Tucker Carlson was claiming Biden's Justice Department seems not very interested in a man called Sam Bankman-Fried. Well, why is that? Maybe it's because Sam Bankman-Fried was the Democratic Party's second biggest donor this cycle. Right? That's just nonsense and paranoia. Elon Musk said Sam Bankman-Fried was a major Democratic donor, so no investigation. Jesse Waters was echoing the same thing. Jeanine Pirro on Fox News. Do we have a two-tiered system of justice? Tucker Carlson said last week Sam Bankman-Fried was the second biggest donor of the Democratic Party. We're hearing the Justice Department is looking into him. He's going to get away with it, said Tucker. Well, he's been arrested. There's a sweeping 8-count indictment against him. It includes campaign finance violations. Right, it takes time to build white-collar cases. Yeah, Bernie Madoff was arrested shortly after his misdeeds came to light, but the situations are not comparable. Right? Bernie Madoff's scheme was revealed by Bernie Madoff himself. He confessed the whole thing to his sons, who then told the FBI. His sons called the FBI 2 days later. 2 agents showed up at Bernie Madoff's home, asked whether there are innocent explanations for what Madoff had told his sons. Bernie Madoff replied, there is no innocent explanation. Right? On the other hand, Sam Bankman-Fried was not anxious to confess. He's repeatedly rejected the idea that his actions amounted to fraud. So why was the arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried on Monday suspicious timing? Because he was due to appear remotely on Tuesday to a House committee where Republicans plan to grill him. So now, from the Republican perspective, Sam Bankman-Fried was not arrested too late, but too early, says this excellent Washington Post article. So there's no real reason to believe the Justice Department is timing all this to help the Democrats. So the U.S. is giving Ukraine Patriot missiles, right? That's the prize of America's air defense systems, right? They've given them to Israel, now they're giving them to Ukraine. And why is the U.S. giving Israel these missiles? Because Putin has been launching particularly devastating attacks using drones, using Iranian drones on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So wars tend to escalate. Like, I always stay out of fights, right? And a lot of people have mocked me, what's the worst that could happen? You get a little bit of pain, but you get to feel like a man. Well, fights tend to escalate. Now, if you get into a fight with an Aussie, it's highly unlikely he'll pull a knife or a gun, or that he'll punch you, below the belt, or that he'll kick you. Aussies tend to be fair dinkum, fair fighters, but you don't know who you're messing with, fights can really escalate. And so too with wars. Wars tend to escalate. So Putin escalated by using Iranian drones to try to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure. Now, Ukraine and the United States are escalating by giving Ukraine our premier air defense systems, the Patriot missiles. And it also looks like Putin is running out of drones. So what will his next move be? I don't think he's just going to put his tail behind his legs and go home. The major reason you want to stay out of wars, if possible, is because they escalate and they escalate and they escalate. And that's the cycle we're in right now with Ukraine. So looking out at the Sydney Opera House from Sydney Harbour Bridge, and great news, guys. I was just reading in the New York Times that Ukraine can win the war, but the price may be too high for the West. Yeah, the price may well be a world-ending, planet-destroying nuclear war with Russia. Right? Do you really think that Russia's just going to give up this fight? So we can usually win many different battles, but sometimes the price is way too high. So it's always a matter of tallying up the price and tallying up the benefits. So Ukraine would need tens of billions of more dollars, more powerful weapons, and it looks like, yeah, they could drive Russia out of territory that Russia's seized in 2022. But you come then with a much escalated chance of war between NATO and Russia explicitly. Right now, the Ukraine and Russia war is just a proxy war with NATO working behind the scenes on behalf of Ukraine. But if it turns from a proxy war into a shooting war, then all bets are off. So, like, how is it in America's interest, Australia's interest, to risk nuclear conflagration in a direct shooting war with Russia so that Ukraine can get back all of its territory? Like, is it so important that we send a message to Putin that he cannot win, right? That we risk, some major escalation. I just don't see the payoff there. The United States has already given Ukraine $50 billion. So playing an incredibly dangerous game. So the Biden administration, underneath all its rhetoric, is engaged in a brutal, brutal calculus. They think that this war is worth it because it will destroy Russia, remove Russia from the ranks of the great powers. But you're taking a significant risk of nuclear escalation. And in the final analysis, how does it benefit England, France, Britain, Australia, United States, whether or not Russia gets to retain any of the territory that is conquered from Ukraine? Like, if we could have peace and removal of the threat of nuclear war, and Ukraine becomes a little smaller, like, why is that an unacceptable price? I'm willing to pay the price for peace. G'day mate, 40 here. So Australia in shock as deadly shootout in rural town kills police officers. So 2 police officers were killed in a shootout at a property in rural Australia. We had a routine follow-up on a missing person report turned into an ambush, a lengthy siege. And this is highly unusual in Australia. So why were the police ambushed? Right, we don't really know yet, but one of the figures who in the ambush, right, Gareth Train, was a conspiracy theorist who believed the false claim that the Port Arthur massacre of 1996 in Tasmania, when an Australian gunman killed 35 people, prompted lawmakers to pass stricter gun laws, and he thought this was a false flag operation. So kind of Alex Jones conspiracy level thinking. So yeah, I believe that conspiracy thinking, conspiracy narratives can lead to terrible behavior, but it's never going to be the primary cause of crime, because I don't think people buy into conspiracy theories or these far-fetched narratives unless they are predisposed to do so, right? A narrative can't take you anywhere you don't want to go. So when people are failing at life and they're looking for ways to feel special and superior to others, conspiracy theories can be highly appealing. So I'm not a fan of Alex Jones. I don't have a problem, or a big problem anyway, with social media companies censoring him or banning him from their platforms. What he did to all the families of the Sandy Hook killing, how they got harassed by Alex Jones listeners who tried to convince them it was a false flag operation. So I don't like that part of the dissident right or the dissident left, but it overwhelmingly comes from the dissident right. Immediately claims after a mass shooting that it was a false flag operation. I don't know any mass shooting in Australia or in the United States. It's a false flag operation. And so it's unfortunate that many people get red-pilled and notice that the media and elites and teachers and academia have been lying to them about certain things. They then extend that to the media is lying to them about everything. And it's not true. We never get to graduate from having to understand everything in its particular context and to seek out multiple sources of information to understand things that are said and done critically. But the media is not, just constantly lying to you about mass shootings. They're not false flag events. But the conspiracy thinking behind these are false flag effects, probably leads to some unfortunate crimes and some self-destructive spirals that people go into. But it does not account to even 1% of murders in the country. Right? Compared to the massive amount of damage that the Black Lives Matter movement has done to stimulate a massive increase in murder and crime and traffic and pedestrian deaths in the United States. The increase in deaths due to these wacky false flag conspiracy theories are absolutely minute. So, g'day mate, 40 here, Sydney Harbour Bridge, looking out at the Sydney Opera House, and Twitter has dissolved its Trust and Safety Council. And I immediately have more trust and feel safer on Twitter. So when Twitter was shadow banning conservatives, censoring conservatives, banning conservatives, the Trust and Safety Committee played a big role in that. So all these Orwellian named teams somehow seem always dominated by the liberal left. Did you really feel more trust in Twitter and more safety on Twitter because of the Trust and Safety Committee? And somehow these committees, these non-governmental organizations, these elites, they're dominated by the left, and they protect the left-wing partisan worldview, which is fine, but they don't even understand their own worldview is partisan. They just think it's objective truth. But in the final analysis, the traditional and the modern, the right and the left, are very different conceptions of the self. And almost all our political differences come down to these fundamental conceptions of the self. Whether you view the self as porous, meaning I'm affected by what goes on around me, so that as a heterosexual, gay marriage still affects me, or if you view the self as buffered, meaning what people do next door, the privacy of their own home does not affect me. The buffered self is a modern, liberal, secular perspective. The porous self is the traditional, even medieval perspective on the self. So the liberal left perspective on the self is that we are strategic, autonomous beings who are basically good. The traditional perspective on the self is that we're not basically good, that we're frequently self-defeating and frequently not so strategic or autonomous, but we're not really so much individuals with inalienable rights, but members of a tribe, a community, an extended family, and whatever rights we are afforded will vary depending on circumstances. So I don't see individuals, generally speaking, primarily as individuals. I see them as members of a group, as members of a tribe. That's kind of the nationalist worldview. While the liberal left, modern secular perspective on the self is that we are individuals born into the world with inalienable rights. The traditional conception of the self is that we are born into families, extended families, tribes, and nations, and that we are primarily not individuals but members of an extended family. G'day mate, 40 here, listening to a podcast on Richard Spencer's Substack, radixjournal.substack, The AI Illusion, recorded December 8, 2022. This is Mark Brahman speaking.
I understand your point. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, again, I think Christianity and Judaism, they are mystery religions, but implicit.
Mystery religions has a meaning. It means that you have to be an initiate to gain access to the mysteries of the religion. So Judaism is like the opposite of a mystery religion. It says the Torah is not far from you, it's very close to you, and yes, you can do it. So mystery religion refers to Hellenic and Greek religions, and Christianity has taken on some aspects of mystery religion, right? You get taken into the mystery of salvation when you believe in Jesus. Judaism's not a mystery religion, right?
They're positing a kind of breeding ideal. So in other words, Yahweh is effectively, when you read the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh is a very, he's certainly not Aryan. He's a very kind of Jewish character. He has a very kind of Jewish personality and character. And so that has a kind of race or ethnic forming consequence, right?
Yeah, but more than the Jewish conception of God, formed the Jews. All right, the Jews formed their religion from the culture and the talents of the Jewish people. Right, it wasn't a particular conception of God that formed the Jewish people.
When you worship a God like Yahweh, you sort of conform a race to that type. So in other words,
no, you don't form a race to that type. Right? That type resonates with certain conceptions of the world. Right? Judaism is not primarily a faith; it's primarily a tribal identity.
This might also be getting be sort of what Richard's getting at is that it's not. It's what we're talking about also is that the religion produces the type as opposed to the race, as opposed to the religion being a kind of what's the word?
Excretion of the race, like
yeah. So
yeah, I would say the opposite is much more true. Like a particular people will develop, a particular understanding of reality. So let's posit the religious faith statement that God came down and gave the Torah to the Jews, but what the Jews then do with the Torah and how they implement it, how they study it, how they practice it, right? How they make it real and concrete in their lives, going to have a whole lot to do with the proclivities and talents and gifts of this particular people, rather than theological conceptions shaping this particular race.
The idea that the old sort of DR trope that culture comes from race, right? We're actually saying the reverse. That
yeah, I would say the old DR trope then is much more accurate.
Culture forms race.
Yes.
Now it may you could argue that there's a kind of chicken and egg relationship there, right? Because part of what we're trying to form, we're trying to recapture on some level we're trying to recapture an ancestor or founder type, but we're trying to even improve on that, right? Because we want a type that is able to sustain civilization, sustain itself, and even improve itself, right?
Yes.
Not something that JF would like, I don't think, because it seems like he's anti.
JF got repeat.
Yeah, he does seem to be in some curious way.
But we're gonna have to compete with the AI. We're gonna have to coexist and compete with the AI.
I need to actually read his book. Yeah.
The Revolutionary Phenotype.
I am a huge skeptic of the power of AI. I think this is...
I don't think we should underestimate it, but I don't think that we should, start preparing for the end of mankind or anything.
Right.
I have an interesting thought I've been throwing around in my own head. I'll put it to you, gents. Is about the AI. Just the fact that when these sort of I don't know what to call it, conspiracy theories like doomsday prophecies, dystopian visions of quote unquote artificial intelligence, that concept itself is a very liberal, it is a product of liberalism in that it reduces, because liberalism in its scientific materialism cannot understand consciousness. And I say this as a materialist, it is something that I do and think about. It reduces consciousness, it describes agency as sort of being able to come from a mechanistic causal system. And all of that is to say, if human beings are programming the Terminator it cannot go beyond, unless there is some type of moment of transcendence, then it in itself cannot have agency. Like, it can have error, which might, like a nuclear bomb might,
Yeah, it sounds like a traditional theist argument. How can something without consciousness create consciousness?
Instead of bombing under the hearts of Russia, it might end up on a kindergarten, God forbid. But that in itself is not agency of the system that human beings have birthed. So I think that at the heart of it is a misnomer and a very sort of scientism, quote unquote, as much as I hate that word, understanding of consciousness and agency.
Well, let me put it to you this way, because this is a new topic, and it's big, and it's something that is, I agree with quite a bit of what you're saying, if not all of it. And let me try to kind of reformulate it in some way. So we have actually used language for a shorter amount of time than we would imagine. And, dogs can understand words. I'm not sure a dog quite has a grammar, but they understand the sound wave as indicating something. A dog knows its name. A dog knows, if he hears the word walk or dinner, and he perks up and is going to look at you and be like, oh, walk, yeah, that sounds great, yeah, let's do it. So he understands language to some extent, but there's no actual grammar or logic exactly. We're Homo sapiens, so wise man, let's say, and we kind of have this notion about ourselves that we are the rational animal or something like that. That is actually extremely incorrect. Fish, I actually just saw something about this today. There was an experiment in Germany in which fish have a sense of numbers. They have a sense of a larger and a smaller number, and they can actually engage in a sort of addition to some extent. So, and they don't have a frontal brain anywhere close to the extent that we have one. So, there's so much, we might even overestimate, the head as the seat of reason or something. We have reason in our spinal cord. And I've used this metaphor quite a bit, and so I apologize if people are getting bored of it, but, there is literally no time to think if you are standing at a baseball plate and someone is throwing 70, 80, 90, 100 miles per hour. You cannot think in that split second when you determine what pitch. Is it a curve? Is it a fastball? Is it a changeup? Is it inside?
Yeah, I think this is really good analysis from Richard.
Inside? Is it outside? Is this the pitch I want to hit? You have absolutely no time to think that, and yet you do. The idea that some of these baseball players could explain to you how a curveball curves, they can't, but they just do it, and they know it in their bones, maybe kind of literally in their bones. An outfielder, he hears a crack off the bat. The audible level of the crack gives him information. He sees it. He sees the ball, maybe even in kind of peripherally to some degree, and he sees it travel 50 feet, and he estimates exactly where he should run to. And he hops to the exact spot, opens up his glove, and in a lackadaisical manner catches it. There is reason, mathematics, rationality in our spinal cord. And we kind of don't grasp this. And your thinking consciousness, when you're using language, it is...
Right, so what's going on with your body is going to have a profound effect with your cognition, your mood, your hormone levels, how much at ease you are in your body, if you're in pain, if your muscles are tight, if you're at ease, if you're free. All right, what's going on with your muscle tension level is going to profoundly affect your thinking. Right, you're not going to be free in your thinking and your emotions if your body is tight and compressed. Right, you're not going to feel anxious if your body is free. You're not going to feel depressed if you've got upward direction flowing through your body. Right, when you feel depressed, your body is going to sag and be depressed, concave, collapsing in and down on itself. So some pretty good analysis here from Richard.
It's kind of almost like a late stage of this. And there also have been experiments, I think I've mentioned these to other people, and I'll mention two. One of which is that your muscles will engage before you think to pick up your coffee. Now, does that mean that we're all predetermined? No, it does not mean that at all. what it means is that you are telling yourself in your mind using language, I want coffee, as a kind of post facto rationalization of what you are instinctively doing. Another thing, so there's a...
Yeah, your body and your reflexes and your instincts, they often kick in way before your cognition. Your body instincts, reactions, want something, desire something, move towards something, and then you use your reason to justify what you want.
There's an experiment that's done where they tell people to pick up, they're blinded, and they tell people to pick up objects, and they say, we want you to judge the texture of these objects. And so you'll pick one up that will be like furry, and you'll pick up another one that will be slick. And then they'll say which object was heavier, and people will get it. What that indicates, that might sound like dumb or obvious. No, it's not dumb or obvious. What that means is that not only are they can engage in reason, they're engaging in judgment unconsciously. Do you understand what I just said, or do I need to repeat that?
Yeah, we have certain basic instincts. We have evolutionarily evolved reactions to life that predispose us to certain psychological reactions, certain verbal reactions, certain political reactions, right? And these are evolutionarily adaptive. The reason we have these instincts and reactions is that they have served our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. And so some people are predisposed towards, a left-wing perspective on life, others towards a right-wing. Some people are predisposed towards, traditional conceptions. Others are more open to, innovative ways of organizing families, communities, civilizations. Right? The left-wing approach is to be more open to new ways of organizing people and families. The right-wing approach is to stick with time-tested traditional ways of organizing people.